The summer I was 10. The lilac bloom hung like a soft rumour across the town, and the old house by the river wore its weather as if it were a shawl, frayed at the edges, but dignified, as though it remembered every guest who had ever stepped across its threshold. I did not fear the house then. I believed it was an old friend who kept to itself in the corner of the yard and watched us from behind curtains that smelled of dust and dried lilac. There was a girl I called Mira, a child I thought I knew as well as I knew my own name, though she disappeared one afternoon as if she had walked into the light and become something else entirely. The adult me knows better now, that the light we blame for vanishing is often the wrong kind of bright, the sort that makes a person forget how to call their own name. The ritual began with Mira's hand in mine and a pile of small river pebbles we'd gathered from the bend below the mill, pebbles that shimmered faintly, as if they remembered something we didn't yet know. We counted the rocks aloud, in a whisper only the two of us would hear, the way two girls tell a secret many townsfolk would call foolish, and perhaps they would be right, except for the way the house listened. We would press a pebble into the sill of the attic window, then place another along the hearth, then a few more forming a crescent on the floorboards where the light of the sunset fell just so. Mira said the house liked numbers, that it kept better company with order than with the clamour of the street. I believed her, for the house never seemed to mind the creak of our shoes, nor the way our breath fogged the glass as we whispered our wishes into the glassy air. "Tell the house what you want," Mira would say, a little bravely, a little afraid, as if the wood and plaster could judge our wishes, and perhaps grant only those that sounded polite enough. We spoke of sunny days, and a future where we would not feel the ache of the world before the ache itself began to form. We spoke also of Mira's mother, a woman who would always be late to the street lamp's glow, the kind of mother who would tell you to be careful on your way home, but would never tell you why the river seemed to pull at your feet as if it would swallow you in a single sigh. The little ritual grew with the summer, and the house, which had never asked for anything but to be left alone with its windows closed, grew in its own way more present. It seemed to lean a little toward the yard when Mira's whispers rose in the attic, and the old stairs, which groaned with a habit of aged bones, answered with a sigh that tasted of rain and faraway orchards. The river's sound changed. It carried a note that wasn't water. Not exactly. More like a memory wearing water as a cloak. If the wind passed through the hall in a certain way, you could swear the house breathed out Mira's laughter, a sound that was bright and terrible at once, the sound of a child who should have been there and was not, a laughter that did not belong to anyone who still stood on two legs and wore shoes. Then came the afternoon when the air tasted of iron and sweet river mud, and Mira did not appear at the porch where we always waited for her. The house's shutters trembled, as if nerves beneath the paint were waking from a long sleep. The attic's lamp lit itself with a stubborn glow that refused to yield to the afternoon sun. The crescent of pebbles on the floor grew heavier, as if a second, older memory had pressed down upon it and couldn't bear to be disturbed. We called Mira's name in a voice that learned to turn into a whisper the moment you feared the answer. But the river gave back nothing, except its own stubborn rhythm, and Mira did not return. The house did not reveal what happened that day in the open air, but it began to tell us in other ways that something had been altered forever. The portrait of Mira that hung above the stair, a girl with hair like wet corn silk, changed at night. It didn't depart from its frame, but the features shifted, When the moonlight spilled across the canvas in the early hours, the line of her jaw softened, the curve of her lips altered. The eye that looked back at me now held something like a quiet severity I could not name. On mornings after, the windows show signs of having listened to a different sound the night before. A soft ticking that didn't belong to any clock in the house. A breath on the back of my neck when I stood in the kitchen. The sort of heat that pressed its way through the old bricks as though it disagreed with itself about whether it belonged there at all. Time in that house stretched in ways it never did outside its walls. The summers passed with Mira a lingering rumour rather than a defined memory. People came and went in the town. The millers, the schoolteacher, the old coalman who wore a scarf in summer to remind the world he had once known winter's bite. And yet Mira, or Mira's presence, persisted in the house like a faint flame you kept stroking to test whether it would truly die. In the years that followed, I learned to walk the rooms with a certain carefulness, as one would tiptoe around a delicate injury one hoped would heal without being touched again. The attic floorboards, once ordinary planks, bore faint imprints of things I could not name, paths that appeared when I walked in certain circles, outlines of a girl's body that vanished as I moved, a night-bright pattern that looked for all the world like constellations arranged to form a face I had believed belonged to a girl who had simply left. When I finally left the town, the house remained. It grew older with the river and the lilac, but it did not forget. My life carried me into years that felt like a long winter. I kept stepping through because I did not know what else to do. And all the while, the house kept its pale vigil, as if it had no other purpose than to survive the absence of those who once filled its rooms with their small, tremulous hopes. I learned to speak softly to the walls, and not to expect that the world would bend to the way we remembered it. Yet the house remembered us in its own stubborn way, remembered Mira with a tenderness that felt almost maternal, as if the building itself had taken onto its bones her loneliness and smiled through the cracks for anyone who would listen. In my old age, now, when the dusk is so patient it seems to listen rather than watch, I return to the river house, or it returns to me. The town grew quiet, as towns do when their old houses forget to forget the lilac bushes. My old accomplices in mischief still carry their heavy perfume, though their blossoms have thinned to pale memories of the blossoms I once knew. The river has learned to hold the joke of a summer a little longer than ordinary rivers hold jokes, letting the water linger around the ankles of the world, as if it knows the cost of letting go. The house, too, is slower, but its memory is not waning. It keeps the